Hey, it's Aaron. Welcome to my show, Reeducation, and today we're going to do something a little bit different because today we're actually going to talk to one of the members of the Seattle Autonomous Zone known as CHAZ. It's a really interesting show. We're going to have a lot of fun here today. Without any further ado, let me introduce my guest. Today we have Comrade Carl, and he is part of many different groups in and around Seattle. Currently, right now, they are supporting the Seattle DSA in their endeavors to help keep this CHAZ thing going. And they're also part of Your Environment Seattle and Seattle Friends of Fission. So thank you very much for coming on with us, Comrade Carl. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I like your work, and I'm happy to provide content. We need to get the facts out about CHAZ. And I'm a part of the petty bourgeoisie, doing my part to liberate peoples of the world. I participate in Seattle DSA, some environmental stuff. I'm a little different. I support fission energy. We actually have a state-owned nuclear power plant, so that's my little wrinkle. But otherwise, you could consider me a standard comrade, and that's my story.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. Why don't you give us a little bit of information about what's going on in your general vicinity right now?
So what we've got to the left here is the normal extent of Cal Anderson Park. There's a lot of people kicking around, having fun, like they've been cooped up for 2 months. But here on my right, we actually have a houseless tent city. I'm not going to record that very much out of respect for the residents. But Seattle has a very big houseless problem, and the Seattle Police Department regularly sweeps the homes of these people out from under the freeway overpasses and all sorts of places that they find themselves, and that's pretty unfortunate. So the result is that while they are inside the CHAZ, they essentially have a refuge. As long as the CHAZ exists, these people are protected from the sweeps.
Awesome. So while you're walking around there, I'm noticing a lot of people that are hanging around. It looks like a lot of people are having a lot of fun. Different colors of people too. I really like to see that. It's a really diverse crowd. Lots of black people, lots of white people, people of every different race. Why don't you tell me a little bit about why everybody is there and why they're all partying and looking like they're having so much fun?
This is somewhat controversial that a bunch of white people gather around and have fun when we're talking about police brutality, but it does help us occupy the space. So the praxis of this situation, we're working on making sure that everyone is aware of what's happening, that we're here for Black Lives Matter, not just to have fun.
That's absolutely fantastic. All right, so why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and tell me a little bit about how all of this got started, at least the Cliff Notes anyway, because I know it has there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, basically for about a week, Seattle had been protesting against police brutality, George Floyd, and we have a local black man was killed by police, Sean Furr. He was shot in the head while carrying his child by Seattle Police Department. That extrajudicial slaying is really fresh in our community, and so we'd been protesting that. Eventually, we walked up Pine Street to Cal Anderson Park right in front of the East Precinct, and thousands of protesters faced off against Seattle police. There's some terrific footage out there. The pink umbrella came out, and the PD grabbed it, and that instigated a tug of war and eventual use of chemical agents, and that really escalated the violence, and then the crowd kept pushing back, eventually depleting SPD forces, and they abandoned the East Precinct. The community stepped up, prevented East Precinct from being burned, and we've been occupying ever since.
That's a harrowing story. That's absolutely incredible. So why do you think the police actually left in the first place? It seemed like the protesters weren't being violent or anything like that. Why do you think that they left?
Well, there was a little bit of an escalation of force, and there was a response from the crowd. However, it was, I think it would have calmed down, but eventually it was too much for SPD, and they gave up their position. They were, essentially double shifting for a long time, from what I've heard, and that led to, pretty big fatigue on their part.
I've actually heard a lot about that too. How a lot of the police force, they are being worked 16-hour days, long shifts. That sort of thing. So obviously they are not doing well at the moment, and it's just kind of adding to this whole powder keg where it could end up releasing in very violent ways. Specifically talking about the police, how do you personally feel about them leaving, and how does everybody in CHAZ, how do you think they feel about the police leaving?
Well, and I've participated in the community self-defense around here. We have volunteers who watch the borders and keep an eye out for disruptive individuals and community disruptions, and we do our best to de-escalate. So the blessing, the silver lining to this is that we are able to demonstrate a community without policing. So that's the benefit. I don't know the general temperature of the people who live here. There's some rumors about people who work for Microsoft who have had a really bad reaction to SPD leaving, but that also might be rumors. There is a gentleman who lives in a single studio right next to the SPD precinct, and he's on the ground floor the entire time. And the results, especially for him, are that when SPD was clashing with protesters, there was tear gas everywhere. It was almost unbearable for the residents, and with the police out, the violence has gone way down, and I think that some of the residents are definitely appreciative that violence is not on their streets.
I think that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, you were talking about having community defense programs. A lot of right-wingers are online saying, oh, you got rid of the police, but now you basically have police again, and you have borders and all of these things. What do you say to somebody that says that?
I say that they need to be on the ground to see what's happening. We've got selectively edited video, people saying that Razz called himself the sheriff or said that he's the police. That's not actually what he said. He said, we are the police, and that's not good praxis on his part. The actual results are that we as a community set a standard of behavior, of coexisting without policing. You talk it out, you have normal interactions, and we are working on everyone around us to have a better community and to reinforce these behaviors we find acceptable. Like, you don't rush the stage of the community, the People's Congress, or I forget what we're calling it, the People's Assembly. You don't rush the stage of the People's Assembly. You don't jump up and down and scream and push it around that stage. You respect the space, you respect the discussions. You don't drive your car through the crowds, things like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So we'll talk a little bit more about the Provocateurs in a moment here. But first, I want to know a couple of other things. Mainly from the consensus that you found throughout CHAZ, what do you think their goal is in regards to police violence? Do you think that there's a narrative that has basically been going around of defund the police, or has there been a bunch of different narratives? What's your take on that?
I think the community consensus coming from the leadership of people like Nikita Oliver and Black Lives Matter of Seattle King County is that the three demands that we have are defund the police, invest that money in community services, and release all protesters from prison. Those are the three demands. Any other lists of demands are the result of the People's Assembly, and that is an ongoing process. But the primary demands are defund SPD, invest in community, and release all protesters. And we're here to hold space until those demands are met, and possibly others that arise from the People's Assembly.
That's fantastic. That's awesome, and it's nice to know that there is an actual message that's out there. And unlike what the narrative that we've seen in the mainstream media has said, there is a message. There are actual things that the protesters want. There are ways that they want to change things, and it's not just all about this mob that doesn't have any clue. There's a lot of informed, very smart, very intelligent people that are on the ground that know what they want. And I really appreciate seeing all of that. Okay, so the next thing I want to know is basically, I've seen a lot of different little things that have gone on, such as worker cooperatives set up. Like you were saying before, there's a certain amount of security that's been set up, a border, as well as some other things. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. What is your feeling? How have you noticed the cooperatives setting up and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and one really great, I'm going to sort of hijack that question and talk about this great cooperative. This is the Rancho Bravo. It is a locally owned chain that took over a KFC. They are hosting the medics for CHAZ. And so you can send medical donations directly to the Rancho Bravo tacos near Cal Anderson Park. And so this, this business, a local business, is really thriving under community support. We have more co-ops, like there's the No Cop co-op right in front of me that I'll walk towards, that is essentially funded by donations. We've got the community giving donations to support the No Cop co-op and essentially keep the protests going.
All right, so you were talking about co-ops. That's fantastic. I love to see that there's a lot of co-ops that are popping up all over the place. And from what I've seen, I actually thought that it was just a couple of street vendors, but apparently there also is some brick and mortar co-ops that are showing up as well. That's really interesting. And I'm assuming that everybody that was in the KFC before, they left the building vacant. Is that what happened?
Actually, Rancho Bravo and the KFC takeover, that happened way before CHAZ. So that was just a KFC that went out of business and was bought by a local Seattle, local Seattle people.
Okay, wow, that's really cool. Okay, so the infrastructure for this kind of community was already there before any of this even happened. That's an interesting thing to talk about. Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to ask you a little bit about is the security force. How exactly does that run? Is it a volunteer thing? Do you nominate people? How do you keep track of those individuals? And is there any rules or regulations in regards to that sort of thing?
I'm not super familiar with the vetting process. I showed up and I dedicated myself to de-escalation and keeping people safe, and that seems to be the number one means of keeping that organized is, mutual respect, mutual support, making sure that we're all doing the right thing, checking each other, and it's organized over sort of rotating signal threads that are disposed of when they're no longer needed. There's a lot of if you know someone and if you establish yourself as trusted within an organization, then you'll be given commensurate access. But it is like any activist organization in Seattle. We're aware of infiltration. We're aware of all sorts of things that could happen to destabilize this movement.
Okay, yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And it makes sense that there's also a vetting process involved, so you don't end up with people that are running around doing crazy things. Now, is there a certain amount of democracy that's been set up there, or is it too early for such a thing yet? Is there any formal organizing that's happening on the ground level?
As far as I'm aware, organizing is both through local socialist parties like PSL Web, Seattle DSA, Socialist Alternative are three that I'm very familiar with, as well as the People's Assembly that we're coming up on. And I haven't heard of any kind of representation happening. However, it seems that we have been joined by representatives of the Duwamish tribe, which is an unrecognized First Nations tribe of the United States, and they might help us with either plans for continuing to occupy the East Precinct, or plans to organize, or some kind of political leadership in a way, or some kind of peer leadership in some way.
So where is King Razz and where is his throne room?
King Razz. Razz is a social media king. That's where his throne is. His throne is on the internet. I have not personally encountered him through any of the organizing contacts that I have. He speaks well. He speaks and he organizes people using his voice. He has made some great points. There's this controversy over CHAZ versus CHOP, and I'm not sure if that was, I don't recognize him extremely well. I've been paying attention to other things, but I think there is consensus with his group that the name doesn't matter. We're here for Black Lives Matter, and from what I've heard of him, other than the sensationalism, it's mostly that he's a good voice for the movement in general, and of course he gets attacked for that.
That's understandable. That's the way it usually goes. So you basically have insinuated that there isn't any real specific leader of CHAZ. There are some people that have assumed sort of leadership type roles, but nobody really has come out and said that they're the king or the warlord of the area or anything like that, right?
That's entirely a created narrative. Yeah. There are certainly affinity groups, but there's no king, there's no gods, no masters.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so now let's jump into the provocateurs you were talking about a little bit a while ago. Obviously, there was the Razz situation, but there was also a couple of other things. Obviously, yesterday there was the issue with Katie Daviscourt, marching through, and a couple of street preachers. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Right, so we had... there we go, Darth Vader. Antifa super soldier right there. Sorry. What we have is, so in the last few days, we had an influx of folks outside of Seattle arrive on the entry. And I'm going to back away because it seems like we have a song going on. So essentially what we had was a lot of outsiders arrive in King County, in Seattle, in order to disrupt the space. And that included folks like conservative Barbie, as well as I think they labeled themselves the Jesus Zone. They had hats printed and everything. It might be something specifically targeting this event from an evangelical or religious fascist organization. There was one person, kind of 6'3", 6'4" guy, very big, yelled and flailed and said religious things to sort of curry favor with the crowds, and there was a lot of deference given him, but there was also a lot of provocation, and there were people who were intentionally following those people in order to get footage.
Yeah, I noticed pretty much immediately after. I had some people that were informing me that there were some provocateurs showing up, and almost within 5-10 minutes, individuals like Ian Miles Chung and Andy No and other right-wing provocateurs immediately had video footage of all of this that was happening, and they immediately started posting it online. So it seems to me, I'm not going to say whether or not it was, but it seems to me like this sort of thing is orchestrated, and I've seen a lot of information all across the web that certain groups in regards to 4chan and that sort of thing have been organizing and trying to get together to do whatever they can to make the people of CHAZ look violent, to make the entire place look delegitimized. And as you can see in front of your faces right now on camera, clearly there is no violence, there's no smashing of windows. Everybody is acting in a very normal, very peaceful way. It looks like a bit of a block party, right? So I really want to get rid of that narrative because that's the narrative everybody is pushing. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah. In fact, I've just noticed this iconography. This used to be the sign Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, and that's been replaced by the raised fist. And I definitely recognize this. This is a tarpee that was used to protest our Governor Jay Inslee and his his soft stance on fossil fuels. So there's definitely some organizations familiar to me. I might have actually worked on that tarpee myself. Some familiar organizations, a lot of community coming together and supporting Black Lives Matter in this moment.
That's fantastic. That's really, really awesome. Now, do you know much about the controversy between CHOP and CHAZ, or is it something that you want to talk about?
I really consider that inconsequential. It may be that liberals are afraid of the term CHAZ. They're afraid of being perceived as autonomous. They're afraid of being perceived as individuals trying to secede from the United States. And that's I don't know. It doesn't really concern me. I'm here for Black Lives Matter, and I don't want to really discuss CHAZ versus CHOP. But, I think you get my perspective there.
Yeah, I totally understand. Okay, so now there was a bunch of other things that happened as well. Also, we've seen a police chief, who a lot of the right-wingers are saying is a black woman, coming out and saying that there's been an increase in violence, apparently calls of rape and that sort of thing. And I've also, on the opposite side of that, heard a lot of reports of frequent individual callers calling into 911 and falsely reporting things as well. So, what's your take on the police chief coming out and talking about this?
Oh yeah. So the black woman you're referring to is our chief of police, Carmen Best. Her claim was that there were increased, rapes, increased incidents of that kind, and that I don't think that's accurate. I think that's been debunked. You can look at the official Seattle PD statistics and find the facts of the matter, and they can't really mess with that. They can't falsify those public records. So that's the truth of what's going on here.
Yeah, I assumed that it was something that would be easily debunked. Okay, so I guess I'll finish off with a couple more questions here. Basically, why don't you tell me why Black Lives Matter is so important and why it's so important to the people that are occupying CHAZ right now?
Well, we have had a lot of local police violence. We've had to deal with an escalation of force, an escalation of resources, and a great deal of our community's budget is sent to the Seattle Police Department unchallenged, and that's been an issue for many years. And so it's really a response to police violence. It's a response to violence in our black community, and that's why there's so many people out here to support the movement.
That's fantastic. Okay, and do you know how anybody who's interested in supporting CHAZ could go about supporting them? Is there any way that we can help in any way, mutual aid, anything?
There's absolutely mutual aid. Again, donating to Rancho Bravo. If you follow Nikita Oliver on Twitter, you can see the organizations that she is encouraging us to support. And for example, the bicycle peloton, they are protecting the marches because the marches are not requesting police presence, and so supporting the bicycle peloton is a really great way of supporting Black Lives Matter in Seattle.
That's perfect. All right, so thank you so much, Comrade Carl, for coming to us from the inside of CHAZ. This has been an incredibly informative interview, and I'm so happy to finally talk to somebody that's there on the ground, and we can actually get a full view of what's going on, and we can see that it's not some sort of scary thing. Nobody is running around in complete chaos. Everything is total, peaceful anarchy, and everything is fine. So thank you very much again, Comrade Carl. Where can we find you?
You can find my environmental and some political actions at yestv.org. That's Your Environment Seattle. I also would love to tell people about the socialist wonder of fission energy in Washington State, and you can find more about that at Seattle Friends of Fission on Facebook.
Awesome. And all of those will be in the link in the description box below. Please check out all of that. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this interview. And yeah, Black Lives Matter and we support CHAZ. So thank you very much again, Carl. And I hope to talk to you again soon.
Great. I'll see you around.
Thanks.